What is going on, everyone? Today we're going to be taking a look at Ryzen 3. That's it, the last two CPUs to be coming out in the Ryzen family here in 2017. We reviewed Ryzen 7, we reviewed Ryzen 5, and we're finishing up with the budget-friendly Ryzen 3 CPUs, testing the Ryzen 1200 today. There's also the 1300X, but for all intents and purposes, these processors are exactly the same. The only real difference being their out-of-the-box clock speed. The Ryzen 1200, which I'm going to be testing in this video, retails for $109, making it the cheapest Ryzen processor that you can currently get to date, and that comes out of the box at 3.1 gigahertz and boosts up to 3.4 gigahertz, while the Ryzen 1300 is $129 and comes out at 3.5 gigahertz with a boost of 3.7. And both of them have a TDP of 65 watts, so they're going to be fairly friendly in terms of temperatures and power consumption, which is a really good thing because it means you aren't going to need to go out and pick up a dedicated CPU cooler. Both of these processors actually ship with the Wraith Stealth. It's not the Wraith Spire, it's not the Wraith Max, it's the Wraith Stealth cooler, and I utilized that in all of my testing because I wanted it, to represent what someone could conceivably see if they went out and picked up one of these CPUs without needing to buy a secondary cooler, an expensive motherboard, all that good stuff. So I kept it in my B350 Tomahawk. So no, X370 boards or, elaborate setups or anything like that. Just a fairly basic setup in terms of the actual PC build. I did test the Ryzen 1200 overclocked. I had it at 3.8 gigahertz at 1.35 volts. That was the highest stable that I could get it. I tried pushing the voltage as high as 1.4 to test for 3.9 or 4 gigahertz, but no matter what I would do, it would eventually crash after just a few minutes of getting into the operating system, so I had to settle at 3.8 gigahertz, so that is what I utilized for all of my testing. And I let that run on IDA64 for just under an hour. I believe it was 55 minutes I let it run, and our temperatures hovered around 62 to 63 degrees Celsius, running on that stock Wraith Stealth cooler, so that is not bad at all. The AMD cooler looks good, and it's actually performing really well. Now, I'm sure all of you guys know out there, if you're enthusiasts and you've been following along with Ryzen, these are both quad-core processors in the 1200 and the 1300X, much like the Ryzen 1400 and the Ryzen 5 family and the Ryzen 1500X. But the main difference here with Ryzen 3 is that they don't have any SMT, so it has no additional threading, in the processor at all. It's just the straight 4-core CPU. So that's just that is what it is. It's the $109 and $129 variants. If you want to get SMT, then you're going to have to spend a little bit more money. The Ryzen 1400 is going for $160 to $170. Right now, I've recently seen it for $159. So you could spend a little bit more and still get the SMT in there, and that probably would be advisable for some people if you're wanting to do anything more than just gaming, or if you want to get a higher powered GPU. For the testing in this video, I utilized the GTX 1080, sorry, I was going to say 1060, the GTX 1080 and the RX 580 at stock settings, and the reason that I settled on using both of those GPUs is because I did a poll over on Twitter asking people what should I test with the 560, 570, 580, or the 1080, and the 1080 actually won out with the most of the votes, but the RX 580 was close behind, only losing by a few percent. So I decided, what better way to decide all of this than to test both of these GPUs, which I think are going to give us some really interesting results in this video as far as testing for a bottleneck with the CPU and how that affects which GPU you should buy, comparing it up with something like a Ryzen 3 processor. For the drivers on both of the graphics cards used in this video, I was testing with the latest. So for NVIDIA, that was 384.94, and for AMD, it was 17.7.2. So I used all the latest drivers. I had the motherboard on the latest BIOS update, all of that good stuff. The RAM inside the system was also at 2933 megahertz and 16 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance. So it has two XMP profiles. I was able to utilize the highest one, which is 2933 megahertz. So that's all of the pertinent information I feel we need to go over for this video, and we did get some really interesting results here. The GTX 1080 ended up being bottlenecked in pretty much every single testing scenario that I went through, pairing it up with the Ryzen 1200 overclocked at 3.8 gigahertz. Both of the GPUs were kept at their stock settings, though I didn't overclock those at all. And as you'll see in some of the side-by-sides here, the GTX 1080 is often getting really close to the performance of the RX 580. It's almost neck and neck in some of these games, and that is really just indicative of how much of a bottleneck the GTX 1080 is coming into, which should, kind of tell you if you are thinking about picking up a Ryzen 1200, you should not look at spending the amount of money that you would on a GTX 1080. Otherwise, you're going to be limited severely in the amount of potential performance you could be getting out of that graphics card. So if you're going for something like that, you would be much wiser to go for something like the Ryzen 1600 or up, really, is where I would start looking if I'm trying to get a GTX 1080 or maybe the new Vega cards, which are rumored to be around 1080 performance, and pairing that, with a Ryzen CPU, you'd want to go Ryzen 1600 or higher, I would feel, because when you're starting to get down into this area like Ryzen 3, you're going to see a pretty significant bottleneck there through the testing. But with the RX 580, that's almost completely gone. I mean, it's really dancing right on the edge. One game was Prey, where I did see the bottleneck creeping up a little bit, where I was not getting full GPU utilization, but in all the other games, we were seeing the CPUs, GPUs getting pinned pretty much in almost all of these games here. Sniper Elite 4 didn't really present much of a bottleneck. That ended up getting an average of 158 FPS on the 1080 and 91 FPS on the RX 580, as you guys will be seeing here in the graph right now. But most of the other scores are still really neck and neck with the averages tested at 1080p on the high preset. And that is just like I was saying, it's because of the bottleneck we're seeing with the GTX 1080. So if you are looking to pick up a Ryzen 3 processor, I would say that your ceiling as far as a budget on a GPU would be an RX 580 or something equivalent on the NVIDIA side, so that's like GTX 1060, or really anything below that. I mean, as you scale down in terms of the pricing on the GPU and, the level of what the GPU is, you're going to see less and less of a bottleneck become present, which you should expect. And, the price of the GPU should reflect, what you're spending on the CPU. I wouldn't expect someone to go out and spend $110 or $130 on a Ryzen 3 processor and then get a $500 graphics card like the GTX 1080. But if you're looking to do anything like the 580 or below, or the GTX 1060 or below, then you're probably going to be pretty happy with the performance that you're getting. And it's really doing very well, honestly, paired up with the RX 580. Taking a look at the 1% lows now, you could see that once again, these numbers are super, super close between the two graphics cards, and that is, again, the bottleneck coming into play there, limiting the performance that the GTX 1080 can get and almost bringing it down pretty close to what the level of an RX 580 is getting here. But those are the results that we got for the Ryzen 1200 and the RX 580 and the GTX 1080. I didn't want this to really present as like a matchup. This isn't like a head-to-head GPU showdown between the 580 and the 1080. We both know that the 1080 has a lot better performance, but when it's being limited as much as it is with Ryzen 1200, it just makes these numbers a lot closer than what they should be. So definitely take that all into account, because if we were testing with something like the 1800X or the 7700K and had those overclocked, we should get a decent amount better performance than what we're seeing here on just the Ryzen 1200 at 3.8 gigahertz. But I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. Please let me know your thoughts. As always, down in the comments below, I do look forward to hearing your feedback and your suggestions on what you'd like to see me test in future videos with either Ryzen 3, Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7, whatever. I've got every single Ryzen CPU you can possibly think of. So if you want to see me test something in combination with a certain GPU or a certain showdown, just let me know down in the comments below, and I'll definitely be happy to consider it. And before we get out of here, I did have to answer just one more question, which I was seeing a lot on my Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7 reviews that I didn't get to touch on. And that is the question I think most of you want to know the answer to. Can it run Roblox? And yes it can. Ryzen 3 can run Roblox. It can run circles around Roblox. That's right. Roblox was running like silky smooth butter all day long, 24/7, 365. So if you want to buy a Ryzen 3 CPU and go play Roblox, and you could Roblox your heart out to the end of the day. But I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. Don't forget to go ahead and leave a like on the video down below if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you're not already. And if you're already subscribed, then you can always hit the notification bell to find out when I'm uploading new videos like this one. And I will catch you guys next time. Ta-ra.